You already know who you need to talk to. You've known it for weeks, so why haven't you? Studies show that 70% of leaders avoid difficult conversations at work, and most of them know it's costing them. Today, I'm going to help you finally have that conversation and show you knowing your team's strengths completely changes the way it goes. So if you've been following along and watching my videos this month, this has been a series, and this is video 3 in the series around CliftonStrengths and performance and your team. So in video 1, we talked about why your new hires keep failing and how CliftonStrengths can really support the hiring process. In the last video, video 2, we went inside a team engagement and looked at what changes after that engagement. In this video, video 3, it's the one that founders need most urgently and the one I see that they struggle with the most. So let's talk about the avoidance loop, right? I know that I have seen this with almost every manager I've worked with in some form, so I know this relates to anyone that's led people, including myself. I'm guilty of it as well. Just because I tell people how to lead doesn't mean I'm perfect. Well, let's make that clear. So, let's say something happens with an employee. It could be something as silly as them being late a few times, or maybe there's an issue with their performance. Maybe it's something that is actually really detrimental to their work, but you don't bring it up with them. You tell themselves, oh, I'll do it next week. And next week turns into next month pretty quickly. And that conversation never happens. You keep putting it off because maybe you don't want to damage the relationship or make people feel uncomfortable, or maybe you yourself feel uncomfortable, which is completely normal if that muscle isn't really worked on, right? So that's what we're doing here. We're building those leadership muscles. You may be thinking, what if they get upset? What if it makes things awkward? What if we can't move past this, right? And then also sometimes people think, I don't want to confront them or have a disagreement. And this is something I've talked about quite often. You don't go in thinking confrontation, right? You need to reframe that. You go in thinking curiosity and getting to the root of the problem. You may have the conversation, but it goes sideways. That's happened before too, right? The employee gets defensive, nothing changes, and now you're dreading talking to them even more or giving them feedback even more. And that happens a lot also. Sometimes the avoidance goes on so long that eventually you just want to let the person go. And I've had that happen so many times. People come to me, usually people that I'm not currently working with. So, they don't have an HR person in their corner yet, and they come to me and say, I have this issue with an employee. And once we start to dig in, I ask a lot of questions. I lead with curiosity for sure in lots of situations, sometimes too much, but I digress as usual. They have been avoiding the situation. They haven't had direct conversations with their employee, or they've had conversations, but they haven't been direct. Expectations haven't been clear or laid out. The employee may not have had actual feedback on what needs to change. That's the other piece. You may address something, but you may have missed the part where you give them the expectation of what you need to see in order for them to succeed or move forward. So remember that also. And, down the line, if you've avoided a conversation and now you're just so frustrated, you just want to fire them, it's the most expensive conversation you've never had. Think about it that way. Avoidance is not kindness. You're doing everybody a disservice by avoiding feedback conversations. It's a leadership cost, it's a business cost, and your team feels it, even when you think they don't. The person that you're specifically dealing with most likely is uncomfortable because nothing has been addressed. So, let's talk a little bit about what happens, before you even open your mouth, right? So every day you wait, right? Every day you avoid that conversation, it compounds. the team sees it, the employee feels it, and you as a leader, you're carrying that weight, and it does not feel good. It probably makes you anxious. It's probably always going on in the back of your mind. I hate that feeling when you are trying to fall asleep at night and, those little things that you've been avoiding just start to creep forward into your conscious from your subconscious. Get ahead of it, right? Because sleep is important. We all need our sleep. The conversation is usually never as bad as you make it out to be in your head. So the longer and longer you wait to have that conversation, the bigger it's going to get in your head and the more nervous you may feel. And so when you just have that conversation right away, it's usually on a smaller scale. If you address something quickly, it's easier. It's usually more of a passing conversation even, right? So I always say silly examples like being late, because in my opinion, that shouldn't be a reason that someone is, doing poorly at their job, right? That's something that people should learn. If you have chronic lateness, set your clocks back an hour so that you arrive on time. There's ways to make that work, right? Sometimes with performance issues, there's no learning. There's no way you can improve that. But with things like being late, I have no patience for that type of stuff because I do think you can fix it. So, if somebody is late, let's say 3 times, instead of avoiding it, it's super easy to just say in the moment, hey, is everything okay? I noticed you've been late a few times. What's going on? Let's talk about it. As opposed to stewing, right? And being like, why are they late? And starting to come up with assumptions. It's so easy to tell ourselves stories without any factual information while we're just sitting on it, right? We're like, oh, well, maybe they were partying all night. What evidence do you have of that, right? None. Stop making assumptions. And so just have that conversation quickly so that you don't come up with all these conspiracy theories, because it's really easy for our brains to do that. Most performance issues are just communication mismatches, not character flaws. So, the employee may not be broken. The approach might be the broken piece there. And when you walk in believing all of these things, the conversation changes before you even say a word. So let me give you an example of how we can utilize our strengths to lead these conversations. And, understanding your employees' strengths really helps with that. So I worked with a client who was having a lot of trouble communicating with one of their employees. And so, they would have check-ins and they would have tasks that needed to be done. And the employee was always really resistant and, wouldn't do those things until the manager was really on them about it. And so, we couldn't really figure out where the miscommunication was, because it seemed like the leader was doing a great job in communicating the needs. We looked at that person's CliftonStrengths profile and saw that they led in a lot of relationship building themes. They had empathy, developer, achiever, responsibility, all of those within their top 6. So, you could tell that they like to be of service to others. They're deeply motivated by others. So, part of their profile really read as they wanted to help people. They wanted to do a good job for the people around them. I keep hitting this microphone. I gotta stop talking with my hands so much. So, the person wasn't really resistant to direction. They just didn't have that natural drive to just do things without the context around it. They were wired to respond to connection. So, we decided that this manager should reframe those asks. Instead of just, I need you to do this, it turned into, and they shifted to, this would really help me if you would do X, Y, Z. If you could take this off my plate, I'd be free to do some other things that I haven't gotten to. This would help me a ton. So reframing the ask around how it helps the leader someone, the employee genuinely respected and cared about, the employee was motivated in a completely different way, right? So it was the same ask. It was just a reframe based on how that employee is wired. And it was a completely different result. They understood. They're like, yeah, absolutely. They were on it. And so now the manager really, leans into that and uses that so that the employee understands by doing parts of their job that maybe they don't do regularly, why they need to do it, because it's helping the team, it's helping others. So, knowing what your team's strengths are really can change performance and performance conversations. Also, so some of the other things, when you use strengths in a performance conversation, some other things change as well. How you deliver the feedback changes. Knowing someone's dominant themes tells you how they receive information. A high empathy person needs to feel that emotional safety of the conversation before they can hear the content. A highly analytical person needs data, needs specific information, not general blanket statements. They need details, right? Same feedback delivered differently. You separate the person from the performance issue as well, right? Strengths reframe the conversation from you're doing this wrong to you're wired this way and it's creating this outcome. Let's work with that. The employee stops feeling attacked and starts feeling understood. Something else it does, blind spots replace blame. I absolutely love this one. So every strength has a blind spot. It's when you overuse that strength, sometimes it can create friction. So just like building any muscle, if you overuse it, you can hurt it, right? I always say responsibility for me is the blind spot that gets the most out of control, right? So what do I need to do? I need to find details out before I say yes to everything that people ask me to do. Because if I don't, I'm just overcommitted and absolutely exhausted. So it creates an awareness when you understand not just what the strengths are, but what the blind spots are within those strengths. Achiever is a great example too. When achiever is overused, that person that's like highly ambitious and needs to get the job done quickly, it can look like steamrolling the team because they're not being patient and waiting for input or others to come along, right? And it's not criticism, it's just an awareness of how to utilize your strengths appropriately. How to open the conversation so it doesn't go defensive immediately. So something that I think is really helpful is if you soften it, right? And again, lead with curiosity. I want to talk about something I've been noticing. I also want to understand where it's coming from, your perspective. Can we do that? Like involving the person in the performance conversation. Now, when I talk about performance conversations, I don't mean if someone has done something absolutely terrible that's like a serious code of conduct violation, right? If somebody shows up to work under the influence or threatens somebody, right? These are not the types of conversations that I am talking about. I'm talking about if somebody doesn't complete a project on time or does it very poorly or the wrong way, or again, my favorite example, being late multiple times. Before the conversation, so the best thing to do to prep is before the conversation, take a look at their CliftonStrengths profile, check out their top 10 themes, and ask yourself, how does this person receive feedback? What motivates them? What blind spots might be at play here? That's your prep. It takes 10 minutes and it changes everything. So back to what I said before too, the conversation in your head is always worse than the actual conversation that you're going to have. Most of the time, the employee already knows something might be a little off, right? And they're waiting for you to bring it up. The conversation isn't necessarily the hard part. I really find that the anticipation and the avoidance is the absolutely worst part of any hard or, feedback conversation. And by avoiding it, you're doing the hard part for way longer than necessary. You don't need all of that buildup. So let's reflect a little on this series, right? We talked about hiring, utilizing CliftonStrengths and finding, the right people for the right role based on not just their interview, but also where their strengths lie. What it looks like to do a team engagement with CliftonStrengths so that the team operates better, more productive, knows how to communicate with each other, and knows who to rely on for certain things. And now we've talked about how to utilize CliftonStrengths in performance conversations. So with these three things together, that's the foundation of a team that actually works and can grow and scale because they have that foundation, and now you can build on top of that. So few things here. If you have a specific conversation that you've been putting off and you want to work together, I do 90-minute intensives that are super quick problem-solving sessions. Even if we've never connected before, 90 minutes is the perfect amount of time to learn about your business, learn where your struggles are, and start to problem solve those. There's the link in the description to book that. And then also team engagement. So if you want to bring CliftonStrengths to your whole team, so every conversation gets easier, so that the team works better together, that they're more productive, I think that, a team engagement could be right for you then. The link is in the description as well to fill out that form, or you can drop the keyword clarity in the comments. Next week, we'll go back to some practical HR guidance. Hope to see you all then.